On today's podcast, I'm super excited to take you into the room at the Thermostat Cultures live event that I hosted back in November of 2024. Today, we'll be sharing one of the significant conversations we had during that event. What you're about to hear is the dialogue I had with my friend James Clear, award-winning author of the global hit book Atomic Habits that has sold over 15 million copies worldwide. This is a powerful conversation about the state of leading ourselves and teams in the world today. Our habits we form shape the future we create. Are we intentional about what we want to support, grow, develop, and create? Or are we simply on autopilot? Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world. Hey everybody, it's Jason and welcome back to the Thermostat Podcast wherever you are and however you're coming to the podcast today. So glad you are here. Welcome in. We are in season 9. So glad you are back with us. Welcome to all the new listeners. We continue to grow, spread all around the world, and so glad that anybody new to the podcast is here. Anybody that's been with us from the very beginning, welcome back. I'm so glad that this continues to add value to your life and your work. My promise, as always, is to hopefully provide some brief moments in your day, in your week, to step back, to breathe in some good oxygen and think about the person you are hoping to be and the culture you're hoping to help create with the people around you in your life and your work. So glad everyone is here for today's chat. Before we dive into today's topic, if you'll do me a quick favor and you'll please subscribe if you haven't already done so, and if you'll rate the podcast 5 stars, of course, on whatever platform you're listening on, and also if you'll leave an authentic review of the podcast on whatever platform in your own words, using your unique, authentic words. Why is these messages relevant in the world today? Why are they helpful in a very noisy world, a negative world? What redeeming value do these messages have? If you share that helps the algorithms and helps other people find these podcasts. And the last one, if you want to help more and you're in a real sharing mood and you want to help people find the podcast and experience it even more, then I invite you to share the episodes you like on social media or with your team or colleagues. Say, hey, if there's an episode that resonates with you, hey, let's listen to this as a team. Let's talk about it. Whatever's authentic for you. Every time we share these messages, they are amplified and reach further in the world. And so thank you. I'm so grateful for the listeners and others who help positive messages like this spread throughout the world. So thank you so much for doing so. On today's podcast, I'm super excited to take you into the room at the Thermostat Cultures live event that I hosted back in November of 2024. The special hybrid event with leaders from across industries. You may know that every fall, this has become an annual event that I host in my hometown of Columbus, Ohio, Thermostat Cultures Live. We do it at a really cool venue here in Columbus, and then also it's a hybrid event, so we can have virtual attendees from a distance. But amazing people have joined me over the years. Howard Behar, former president of Starbucks, Shane Battier, 2-time NBA champion, Greg Oden, former number 1 pick, Jenny Britton Bauer from Jenny's Ice Cream, Cameron Mitchell from Cameron Mitchell Restaurants, and more and more and more. I could go on and on and on talking about all the great people that have been a part of this in the past. And this year was no exception to that. And I'm excited to share one of our conversations from today. So today we'll be sharing one of the significant conversations we had during that event. What you're about to hear is the dialogue I had with my friend James Clear, award-winning author of the global hit book Atomic Habits that has sold over 15 million copies worldwide. James is an amazing person and mind, and it was awesome to just get some time to share some of the conversations we've had behind the scenes, but to share it with this audience. This is a powerful conversation about the state of leading ourselves and teams in the world today. Our habits we form shape the future we create. Are we intentional about what we want to support, grow, develop, and create? Or are we simply on autopilot? You'll see so many connections to the art of building habits, to how we develop our own leadership mindset, and also how we intentionally build habits to create our team cultures. So thank you for listening, and if you're interested in the Thermostat Cultures live event in 2025, then I encourage you to visit thermostatcultureslive.com throughout the year. More updates will come, and then begin to block off some time in the fall for this special event. Again, more info will come out this spring and into the summer, but keep your eye on that for if you want to be a part of this powerful, powerful experience. Now, let's take you into the room for this powerful conversation.
Habits. All of us, every single day, one would say that our days are made up of just a string of habits, that we fall into patterns as humans, and all of us have good habits, things that bring out the best of us, and things that we might practice each day, whether we consciously are doing it or not, that might bring out the best in us. And then I think we also, because we're imperfect, we have habits that maybe get in the way. Things that get in the way of us personally, where maybe it's in our personal life, but also maybe it is the way that we interact with the people around us and the culture that we then set in the relationships around us. And we also know that that's true in organizational settings. That we have organizations that, again, no organization is perfect, but the habits we start to form of what we value and how we communicate and how we do the work, that oftentimes there are habits that we form that bring out the best in us, and sometimes there's habits we form that get in the way of us really creating the culture that we want. I'm super excited to have the first guest come join me today. You know of James Clear, I'm sure. James, I had known of James's work and certainly his book, Atomic Habits, which is 15 million copies or something crazy like that, been sold around the world in 60 different languages, just amazing stuff. He's got a newsletter with 3 million subscribers and folks that are interested in his research and understanding of habits and how that relates to our lives. I had known of his work. I had certainly referenced his work. Even on my podcast, I'd taken some of the language that he used around habits, and I connected to that, to the synergy around a lot of the stuff that I was talking about in terms of culture shaping, was great. And so I knew of his work and certainly celebrating his work. And then all of a sudden, we were lucky to both speak at an event at Denison University. And the people that were putting it together said, well, yeah, you know James, because I went to Denison University. They were like, oh, you know James? And I said, I know of James, but I don't know James. And I think they said, you know Jason? And he said, I don't know who that smaller, pale, bald guy is. And that's probably how it went, right? And sure enough, I didn't know that he was even in Columbus. He didn't know I was in Columbus. I didn't know he was a Denison University alum. He didn't know that I was a Denison University alum. And all of a sudden, we connected at this event, and we're lucky to both speak there. And then, since then, have what I've enjoyed the most is a couple of times to get together and have coffee and start to get to know him as a person and to think about how this impacts his life. He's got 2 young kids. He's a husband. He's a father. He's got his 3rd child coming in 4 weeks, right? And so I'm excited to share him with you all and us to talk about not only our personal habits, but how that may influence the cultures that we create around us. Would you welcome up James Clear? Hey, buddy. Thanks, everyone. Here's the book, by the way.
Good morning.
Look at that. Everybody go get one. Okay. So glad you're here, man. Thanks for taking time to just be with us and talk about all these things. First and foremost, why has this from your estimation, why has this habit thing caught on? Like, why has that been such a wild success in your estimation of why people have just been drawn to this work?
I think it's a miracle anybody reads what I write. I feel like there are a couple things that are going on. Like habits are universal, right? We all have them. They apply to pretty much everything that we do in some capacity. They're not the only thing that matter in life, but they are widely prevalent everywhere. They can apply to any industry, any topic, personal, professional, whatever. So they have this universal quality. They also have a timeless quality. Like Atomic Habits is not the first book on habits, right? 7 Habits, Highly Effective People, Power of Habit, whatever. And it won't be the last. There will be, I'm just adding my little bit to the pile. And there will be many other people that write and talk about the topic over time. So it has this kind of evergreen nature. And then the third thing, which is you don't usually find with something that's like pretty universal or widespread, is that habits are also very personal. Your habits feel like your habits, not mine. And everybody's got their own little package of routines and behaviors that they're doing. And so that combination of it's universal, it's timeless, and it's personal, I think collectively those things, you end up getting a lot of people interested in the topic.
Love it. For those, I know everybody here has read the book already, but just for those that haven't.
If you've heard of Atomic Habits, put your hand up. Okay, if you keep your hand up if you read Atomic Habits. All right, keep your hand up if you liked Atomic Habits. Okay, all right, cool. Just want to get a sense. I'll do that in a room, and people will drop their hand and be like, I'll do it in front of them.
Yeah, I paused for a second there, bro. I didn't know what kind of response.
It's a small room. You can't hide here, so it's probably just safer to keep it up. All
right. So give us quickly, kind of the 4 laws of habit forming.
Sure.
And let's get nerd out for a second about habits and like what is happening in our brain when we think about those habits that either we've already formed or we're trying to form.
All right, so just give me a minute to unpack this. So if you're going through a habit, and I'll kind of save most of the science for the book. There's a lot of science and research behind this, but just a quick summary. So there are 4 stages that pretty much all behaviors go through, certainly all habits. And so the 4 stages are cue, craving, response, and reward. So cue, craving, response, and reward. So the cue is something that your brain notices. It's something that gets your attention. For example, when you're driving down the road, if you hear a siren, that's the ambulance, is an auditory cue that starts the habit of pulling to the side of the road. Or maybe let's say you walked into this room at night and all the lights were off. The darkness would be a cue that starts the habit of flipping the light switch on. So the cue is something that gets your attention. The craving, probably the more scientific way to describe it is it's a prediction that your brain makes about what to do next or what that cue means. So like if you walk into the kitchen and you see a plate of cookies on the counter, it's a visual cue. But then it's really the prediction that your brain makes, oh, hey, a cookie will be sweet, sugary, tasty, enjoyable. That gives you this motivation, the craving, the desire to walk over, pick it up, and take a bite. So that's the third step, the response. It's the actual habit you perform. So cue is something you notice. Craving is a prediction about what that means. And then the response is the action. That's the actual habit. And then finally, there's a reward. Now, not every behavior in life is rewarding. Sometimes things have a cost or a consequence. Sometimes they're just sort of neutral. They don't really mean a whole lot. But if a behavior is not rewarding, if it doesn't feel beneficial in some way, if it doesn't serve you in some way, even your bad habits serve some need. If it doesn't serve you in some way, it's really hard for it to become a habit. You need that reward to kind of close the feedback loop and give your brain a reason to say, hey, next time I'm going to show up and do a similar thing when we're in this circumstance. So cue, craving, response, reward. And this is happening all the time, and in many cases very quickly. Like that example I gave, let's say you walk in this room tonight and the lights are off. Cue, lights are off, it's dark. Craving, I want to be able to see. Response, I flip the switch. Reward, the lights are now on, the room is lit up. And all that happens in a fraction of a second. So your brain is going through this cycle again and again. And what I'm really describing here is the process of learning. It's the process of learning a new behavior. How do we learn in life? We notice things around us, and then we make predictions about what to do next, and we take certain actions, and they're kind of like we're running little experiments all day long. And sometimes the experiments lead to a reward or lead to a satisfying outcome. And when they do, your brain remembers it and we repeat it next time. I have a 2-year-old at home, and he's making all kinds of predictions about where do I put my leg, or can I grab this handle, or can I, whatever. And he's eventually learning what gets him what he wants and what doesn't.
The stove is hot.
Yes, and adults are no different. We've already learned a lot of those lessons, and then we move on to the next sort of thing that we want to learn. All right, so that's the context, right? That's the kind of scientific discussion of what's going on when your brain is forming habits. But what I really care about, and I would imagine what many of you care about, is how do I operationalize this? How do I turn this into something actionable that I can actually use in daily life and work? And so I've come up with what I call the 4 laws of behavior change. And if you've read the book, this is kind of a big chunk of the book is about these 4 laws. And it's really, if you want to build a new habit, if you want to get a behavior to stick, there are really 4 things you're hoping to get working for you. The first law is to make it obvious. So the cues of your habits, you want them to be obvious, available, visible, easy to see. Easier it is to see or get your attention, the more likely you are to act on it. So make it obvious is the first law. Make it attractive is the second law. The more attractive, appealing, the more fun your habits feel, the more motivating or engaging it is, the more likely you are to feel compelled to do it. So make it attractive. The third law is to make it easy. The easier, more convenient, frictionless, simple a habit is, the more likely it is to be performed. A lot of the time, a lot of the behaviors we perform in life are based on convenience. They're based on ease. And
for that one, tell me if I'm right, but so when I think about that, make it easy, the example that comes to my mind is if I want to all of a sudden I say I'm going to get in shape and I want to be able to run a 5K or whatever it is. That part of the easy thing is don't say, okay, I'm going to go from 0 to 5K, to say, all right, the easy thing is I'm going to start by saying I'm going to walk around the block once a day.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Is that a...
Yeah, that's a very classic example, and I would say that whatever the habit is you're trying to build, it is very easy to get in the mindset where you say, where do I want to end up? What results do I want? This is natural, right? Like the world is very, very results-oriented. I'm very results-oriented. We all want better outcomes. But rather than optimizing for the finish line, where do we want to end up? I think it's much better to optimize for the starting line. How do I make it easy to get started? How do I make it easy to get into the thing that pays off? And if you can optimize for the starting line, which going around the block is one way to do that, then you find that you're showing up. Now you're in the arena. Now you've got all kinds of things that you can improve and scale up from there. So third law is to make it easy. And then the fourth and final law is to make it satisfying. The more satisfying or enjoyable your habits are, the more pleasurable, rewarding they are, the more like you are to feel like, hey, I should do this again tomorrow. So make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying. If you're sitting there and you have a behavior that you're like, I keep saying I want to do this, but I continue to procrastinate on it. I just haven't gotten off square one. Or maybe in your teams or in the work that you all do, you can think of something where you say, we keep asking people to do this, but they only do it every now and then. We wish they were more consistent with it. You can just go through these 4 laws and ask yourself, how can we make the behavior more obvious? How can we make it more attractive? How can I make it easier? How can I make it more satisfying? And the answers to those questions will naturally call forth different things that you could do to increase the odds that the behavior is going to occur. So there are many ways to do each of these things. There are many ways to make habits obvious, many ways to make them easy, and so on. And you don't always need all 4 of them working at the same time. But the more that you have working in your favor, it's kind of like levers. And when the levers are in the right positions, building good habits is easy. And when the levers are in the wrong positions, you're fighting an uphill battle. You're kind of playing the game on hard mode. So the more that you can make your habits obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying, the better positioned you are. Okay, one last thing to add.
Please.
So obvious, attractive, easy, satisfying for building a good habit. If you want to break a bad habit, then you just invert those 4. So rather than making it obvious, make it invisible. Unsubscribe from emails. Don't keep junk food in the house. If you're trying to follow a new diet, don't follow a bunch of food bloggers on Instagram. Reduce exposure to the cue.
Can you just list some other examples?
Yeah. Rather than making it attractive, make it unattractive. Okay? Rather than making it easy, make it difficult. Increase friction, add steps, increase distance between you and the behavior. Rather than making it satisfying, make it unsatisfying. Layer on some kind of cost or consequence. Maybe there's some kind of punishment for it happening, especially if it's an immediate cost. People will try to avoid that. So good habit, obvious, attractive, easy, satisfying. Break a bad habit, make it invisible, unattractive, difficult, unsatisfying. So again, many ways to do each of those things, but 10,000-foot view, that's what we're trying to do.
I love the language you use around standardize, before you optimize, if I got that right. And so oftentimes I think what we think is, oh, okay, I got to come out of the gate, and again, I've got to have I got to have the whole cake baked already. And so I got to optimize this. So I'm not going to start until I'm ready to do it right. And yet really the research shows, if I understand the idea best, is if we only wait until something is optimized, we'll never actually start, or it'll take us longer to get there. And so first think about, well, okay, how can I begin to make this a standard and begin to get some traction on it and optimize it as I go?
Let me so quick story. I have a reader. His name's Mitch. I mentioned him in the book. He lost over 100 pounds, kept it off for more than a decade now. And when he first started going to the gym, he did this weird little thing, which is he wasn't allowed to stay for longer than 5 minutes. So he had this little rule. He'd get in the car, drive to the gym, get out, do half an exercise, get back in the car, drive home. And it sounds ridiculous, right? It sounds silly. You're like, clearly this is not going to get the results that he wants. But what you realize, if you take a step back, is he was mastering the art of showing up. And he was becoming the type of person that went to the gym 4 days a week, even if it was only for 5 minutes. And sort of the deep truth about habits is that a habit must be established before it can be improved. And so often in life, we are trying to find ways to make it perfect at the start. We're so focused on optimizing, so focused on finding the best sales strategy, the ideal business plan, the perfect diet plan, the ideal workout. Like, we're so focused on optimizing that we don't give ourselves permission to show up in a small way. But, if you can't master the art of going to the gym for 5 minutes 4 days a week, like, who cares how good the 45-minute workout plan is? It's just a theory at that point. There's that quote from Ed Lattimore where he says, the heaviest weight at the gym is the front door. There are a lot of things in life that are like that. The hardest step is the first movement. So again, are we optimizing for the starting line or the finish line? And there's this story that we tell, I think particularly in business, there's a story we tell which is, we're not quite ready to do this yet. We need to learn more, or we need to research more. We need to gather a little more data. We need to get prepared. And certainly research and learning and preparation are very important things in life. But if your research and learning and reading are complementing actions you are already taking, great, it's probably really useful. But if they are substituting for actions you should be taking, now it's just a crutch. And we're using research and learning as a way to say, oh, we're doing something on this. But actually what it is it's just a safe way to feel like you're making progress without running the risk of failure. And what you really need is to get in the mix. Because it's actually by trying things, even if it's just in a small way, that you learn the most important piece of information, which is this working for us or not? And so the 2-minute rule, which is scale your habits down, make them less than 2 minutes long, or optimizing for the starting line rather than the finish line, are all ways of encouraging you to get in the mix, get a habit established, and then you can improve it from there.
What gets in our way? Like when you again, I can retrace backwards and say, oh, well, that's what's getting my way. But when you just look kind of globally across, well, why don't we do what we say we're going to do? What seems, I have this vision for what I say I want, but why is it that, I've shared this before in my book, Breathing Oxygen, I talk about this, that $3 billion every year goes unclaimed in lottos. Which I just think is hilarious because I think it tells
free money.
It says a lot about us as humans because we love the idea of winning the lotto. But what ends up happening, what it tells me about human behavior, is we suck at the follow-through.
Yeah.
We love the idea of winning, but when it comes to actually collecting and going through the steps that it would require to get there, we end up just leaving $3 billion unclaimed. So, why do we suck at the follow-through? What gets in the way of our habits?
Okay, so 2 answers. The first is, broadly, you could break most problems that people have with habits into 2 buckets. First bucket is getting started. Second bucket is sticking with it. There are many things under each of those buckets, but broadly speaking. Now, what does it mean to stick with it? The second bucket? Well, usually it means that you show up each day and you get started again and again. So ultimately, all problems can boil down to making it easy to get started, because to be consistent just means that you have mastered the art of starting day after day. So what is it that prevents us from getting started is maybe a more precise way to ask that question.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is we just went through those 4 laws, remember, and we talked about the way to break a bad habit is you want to make it invisible, unattractive, difficult, unsatisfying. What's interesting is the good habits that we wish we could follow through on, but we often don't, it's because some of those things are going on. The good habit you want to do is invisible, unattractive, difficult, or unsatisfying. And so can you find ways to change that? So the thing that you want to do, is it I think one interesting question you can ask is walk into the rooms where you spend most of your time each day, your living room, your bedroom, your kitchen, your office, and then look around those spaces and ask yourself, what is this space designed to encourage? What behaviors are easy here? What behaviors are obvious here? And you'll find that often the thing that you say you want to do, the thing that you say is a priority, is not the obvious choice. You can do this not just with physical spaces, but also digital ones. So a couple of years ago, I really wanted to try to prioritize reading more. And one of the first things I did was take all the apps on my home screen, move them to the second screen, download Audible for audiobooks, and put that on the home screen. So it was the first thing that I would see whenever I'd open my phone. Now, look, one change like that is not going to radically transform your behavior, but you can start to imagine if you make a dozen or 2 dozen or 50 adjustments like that to your physical and digital environment, all of a sudden you're living in a space where the good habit is the path of least resistance. Much easier to follow through. So is it invisible or is it obvious? That's the first thing. Second thing, attractive. If I could put one thing in the book that I didn't, it would be this question of what would this look like if it was fun? You know, and pretty much any habit or any behavior you're trying to get people to do, I think it's worth it to spend at least 15 minutes, if not an hour or two, leaning against that question. What would it look like if this was fun? Most common New Year's resolution is to do some kind of exercise.
Yeah.
And I feel like most people are in the gym in January because they think they should be in the gym, or society wants them to be in the gym, or their friends expect them to be in the gym, not because they actually want to do it.
It's about a 3-week trial, right?
And isn't
that what research shows that?
Right, most
by
of them,
3 weeks
I think it's like
into January,
88% fall off within the first month or something.
Yeah, suck at the follow through again.
Right. But we could come up with a very long list of what it looks like to live a healthy lifestyle. You know, rock climb or kayak or ride a bike or, we just spend 15 minutes. You probably come up with 50 things. And for whatever the habit is you're trying to get people to perform, I think it's worth it to try to brainstorm that list and then look at it and say, which one of these options sounds like the most fun to me? And that doesn't mean that every habit in your life is going to be like the most fun thing that you do. You know, it's not always going to feel like going to a concert or something. But pretty much any habit can be more exciting than the default. You know, it can be more fun than the first thing that comes to mind. And so I think that's an example of making it attractive. This good habit I say that I want to do, is this actually something that sounds engaging to me? Like 2 examples. So I had one reader, he wanted to meditate more consistently, very common habit people want to pick up. But it kind of felt like a pain in the ass to him, and he was like, I don't really enjoy this. And so he asked this question of what would this look like if it was fun? And he decided that for him, fun would be if he listened to a Prince album while he was meditating. And so he did that for the first 2 or 3 months, and it was enjoyable, and he got into the habit of it. And then after that, he's like, okay, I'm doing this every day. I can transition into something more traditional or something more like what we think meditation would look like.
Prince was the gateway drug to happiness.
Right, yeah.
Write that down. Somebody write that down.
Yeah, Purple Rain is the key. And then the second example, this woman who's a reader of mine, she felt like she was eating out for lunch too much. And she wanted to bring salads in, but making a salad kind of sounded like a hassle, and it wasn't that fun. She wasn't excited about eating it. So she asked this question of what would this look like if it was fun? And she decided that it was going to be a party in a bowl was her little mantra. And so for the beginning, she would sprinkle potato chips on top, or she would cut up Snickers bars and throw those in there or whatever. But the point was just to enjoy doing it. And then once she was in the habit of doing it for a month or 2, then she was like, okay, now I can start to improve this and make it a little healthier. But what would it look like if it was fun is a good way to get you in to the habit. And then the last 2, a lot of times we say we want to do something, but then we bite off more than we can chew. It's really big. We make it really difficult. And this is one of those, if I could only pick one of the 4 laws to focus on, it would be the 3rd law, make it easy. Because it's just one of those durable pieces of advice that you hear it and it makes sense, and then next week you get busy and you get frustrated and more stuff gets on your plate, and then all of a sudden you're trying to do too much again. And so again and again, we have to remind ourselves, how can we scale it down and make it easy to do? I already talked about optimizing for the starting line rather than the finish line. Another little frame that I like is when people think about building better habits, and this I think is particularly true for ambitious people, it's very easy to get in this mode where you're in, even if you don't say it explicitly, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, okay, if I really got this dialed in, what would peak performance look like? What could I really do? If I was dialed in, what could I achieve on my best day? And rather than asking yourself, what can I do on my best day? I think it is better to start by asking, what could I stick to even on the bad days? And that becomes your floor. That becomes the new habit. Because what the real question is, can you do it when you're tired, when you're stressed, when you're exhausted, When time is tight and you don't have much time, can you fit it in? And in popular culture, we often talk about consistency as this like discipline and grit. It's the consistent person is the person who like grinds through and always makes it happen no matter what the circumstances. But in reality, I think in the real world, what consistency often looks like is adaptability. Don't have enough time, do the short version. Don't have enough energy, do the easy version. Don't have the skills, scale it down and make it so it's something you can accomplish. Like, it's finding a way to show up and to not have a 0 day, to not throw up a 0. That's what consistency really looks like. And if you have that kind of adaptability and to make it easier, then you find that the habit starts to stick. If you maintain the habit, all you need is time. But if you're just like kind of in this yo-yo pattern where you do it one day and then you don't do it for 3 days, that's when people get frustrated and you don't see the results. And then the final reason we don't stick to habits is they're not rewarding. They're not enjoyable, And so can you find some way to enjoy the process? A little example here is I had a reader, he and his wife, they ate out for dinner a lot and they wanted to stop doing that. Felt like it was getting expensive. They wanted to just be a little healthier and cook dinner. But again, that didn't sound fun to them. And a lot of these habits that sometimes I call them like habits of, they're kind of like abstinence, or you're abstaining from doing something like not playing video games or not looking at your phone or not, whatever.
Yeah.
Those kind of habits are not fun, not drinking wine, whatever. It's like all I'm doing is
That's
just sitting here thinking about how I'm not having a good time. And so instead, you want to try to invert that a little bit and try to find something about the process that's enjoyable. So what they did was, instead of sitting there and thinking, oh, we're not going out to eat at this restaurant we like, they created a savings account. They labeled it Trip to Europe. And then anytime that they stayed home to make food, they took the money they would have been paying going out to eat, and they put $25 or $50 or whatever into the account. And now all of a sudden they can think about where they're going to go. Maybe they talk about it while they're making dinner.
Nice.
They see the account grow a little bit, and they're getting excited about the vacation that's coming in 9 months or whatever. So find something about the process that's enjoyable and rewarding, and that will help invert it.
So by the way, I want everybody to be thinking, like, if you have questions or things you want to fire at James, I want to make sure we get to that here in just a second. But let me transition. So from that foundation around habits, the reality, again, is we all have them. And so I have them personally, and we all, if we're talking about what is the temperature that we want to set in our life and our work, then to think about and to step back, and if you think about the 6 A's that I put up there, is for me to first assess, well, what are those things that are bringing out the best in me? And what are those things that are getting in the way? What are those habits that I want to continue to feed? And what are those habits that I need that are kind of getting in the way, right? We all have those personally, but then also to think about it in an organizational setting. For somebody that gets to walk into many different companies, you get into different cultures and you can start to feel it, right, in different environments. And you can start to see that there are places that the habits they've established, whether on one end of the spectrum, maybe you walk into a place and you can see that they have perpetuated this kind of busyness and this, everybody put your head down and grind and nobody look up, and it's this almost beehive kind of feeling around there that people, and that's really what they've honored, and then they're surprised when they feel like they have a lack of connection with their people. Does that make sense? On the other hand, on the other end of the spectrum, may be a culture that they feel like connection is really high and they have those kind of relationships, but where they struggle is then actually bringing performance into practice, right? So think about that as a spectrum. What do you see from an organizational standpoint? Are there habits that you notice that help bring out the best in teams and cultures, or ones that you're seeing kind of get in the way?
So let me answer one of the big ideas from Atomic Habits. Let me just kind of unpack this, and then we'll get there. So we often talk about habits as mattering because of the results that they will get us. Hey, habits are important because they can help you make more money or reduce stress or be more productive or lose weight or whatever. And look, habits can do all that stuff, and that's great. But the real reason, the true reason that habits matter, is that every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. So they are the pathway through which you reinforce your identity or embody being a type of person. Every day that you make your bed, you embody the identity of someone who's clean and organized. If you study biology for 20 minutes on Tuesday night, you embody the identity of someone who is studious. You go outside today and shoot a basketball for 10 minutes. You don't instantly think, oh, I'm a basketball player. But if you do that every day for the next 6 months or a year or 2 years, at some point you cross this threshold where you have to say, yeah, I guess playing basketball is kind of a big part of who I am. And it works that way for all of our habits. They are repeatedly providing evidence of the type of person that we are. In fact, the word identity, it comes from this Latin word identidem, which means your repeated beingness. So it is the way that you repeatedly show up in the world that fosters and shapes your identity.
Your repeated beingness.
Right. So the question I think to ask yourself when you're trying to build new habits or shape new behaviors is not necessarily what do we wish to achieve, but who do we wish to become? And how are our habits reinforcing that identity? Do we have behaviors each day as an individual and also as a team that are reinforcing and casting votes for being that kind of person or being that kind of group? You know, what votes are we casting right now and how are we showing up? And so if you can do that, I think just having that conversation with the team is helpful because it gives people a through line from the tasks that they're being asked to do each day. Hey, why am I being asked to make 10 sales calls a day? Or why am I being asked to file this report or whatever? And if you can draw that through line from the daily behaviors to the larger identity that we are trying to show up as a team, they start to see the greater importance of those daily actions. You know, it's very easy to dismiss the daily stuff, to say, oh, it's just something I do once or twice. But when you start to see it accumulating into this larger picture, then you start to see why it really matters. And so as an individual, I think there's kind of a two-step process you can go through. The first step is to ask yourself, who am I trying to become? And then the second step is to prove it to yourself with small wins. So what are the small ways that I can cast votes for that identity, for that type of person that I want to be?
But before we dive into that topic, let's take a break. Let's pause for a second, and we'll be right back. Many teams and organizations right now are realizing that they need to do both. They need to engage the minds and hearts of their people in person, where everyone in the room can experience the energy of congregating together and find clarity for the road ahead. And they also need to continue to find ways to engage the minds and hearts of their people virtually, with those who are working remotely or at a distance. So, if you are in the process of planning your next team meeting, company all-hands event, conference or culture summit, and are looking for support with a powerful keynote speech, facilitated team conversations that are the currency for change, or deeper development on leadership mindset and an intentional strategy for the culture you're trying to create, I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon. I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon.
What is the temperature I'm trying to set?
Right.
The back to the January kind of visioning piece of this, of like everybody running to the gym or saying, hey, I'm going to, my New Year's resolutions. The last few years I've done a podcast around this idea that being drive your doing, which that repeated beingness, is that what you said? Mm-hmm. That nugget is part of the research that shows up of why people, fall off after 3 weeks, is because it's about the doing rather than the being. And they're wrapped up in what am I going to go do rather than who it is that I'm trying to be.
Ultimately, behavior and beliefs are a two-way street, right? So what you believe influences the way you act, but the actions that you take also influence what you believe about yourself. I had a high school basketball coach who told me confidence is just displayed ability. And what his point was, if you want to feel confident about making free throws, go out and shoot a bunch for an hour, and when you knock 10 down in a row, you're going to feel a lot better about it. And a lot of your habits are like that. Can you find some small way to show up and prove it to yourself? And this is a little bit different than what you often hear. You'll often hear people say something like, fake it till you make it. And I don't necessarily have anything wrong with fake it till you make it. It's asking you to believe something positive about yourself. But it's asking you to believe something positive without having evidence for it. And we have a word for beliefs that don't have evidence. Call it delusion. right? Like your brain doesn't like this mismatch between what you say you are and what you're actually doing. And so my encouragement, my suggestion is to let the behavior lead the way. To start with one sales call or sending one email or 1 minute of meditation or whatever it is, and let that small, easy action cast a vote for being that kind of person. And as you kind of build up the pile of evidence and keep casting votes each day, you shift the weight of the story in favor of that. And what we're ultimately trying to get to is this point where you take pride in that aspect of your story. You take pride in being that kind of person. And when you reach that stage, you'll fight to maintain the habit. You know, like somebody who takes pride in the size of their biceps never skips arm day at the gym. Or if you take pride in how your hair looks.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Actually,
take pride in how
senior
your hair
in high
looks
school son right now.
Yeah, right, yeah. He's
bulking.
He's got it.
Yeah.
But the things that you take pride in are the things that you want to stick with, you know? And when you start to see it as part of your story, like the person who thinks, I'm a runner, they don't have to motivate themselves to go for a run in quite the same way that somebody who's just getting started does. They're like, no, like just part of who I am, part of what I normally do. And we all have pieces of our story that are like that. And the tricky part is your identity can either build you up or it can hold you back. You know, we all have pieces of our identity like, I'm bad at math. I'm terrible at remembering directions. I'm not good at remembering people's names. I have a sweet tooth. Like these are all stories that we tell ourselves that then reinforce that type of behavior.
Anchor this negative thought that then becomes the pattern of the habit that we form.
And so at some deep level, the process of growth is the process of unlearning those identities that no longer serve us and learning these new identities that do and casting votes for those and building up evidence that you have a reason to believe in it.
Yeah, it's good. It's really good. What questions should we be asking? Yeah.
Hey.
Harold, let's get a microphone just so virtual audience can also hear what's going on. If we can jump in there.
Check. Hello.
Hello. My name's Lucy, and my question is about accountability. I think I read that if you tell somebody about a goal that you have or you get them involved, it significantly increases. So with your research, if you're looking at your personal life, if you tell your spouse or work together, or in the workplace, if you tell a colleague or a teammate about a shared goal, can you talk about any increase or tenfold of seeing that happen?
Sure. So I know you didn't mean it like this. Tenfold, there's basically no interventions that will do that kind of response. Like pretty much all of any real scientific research, what they find is it's almost always very incremental progress. You know, there are things that'll move the needle 5% or something, you know, but it's very rare to come across something that will like literally double your results. Having said that, there is one intervention that may double your results, and it is simply making a plan for when and where you will implement the behavior. So the difference between people who say, I would like to meditate, or I would like to work out, or I would like
someday
to do whatever.
I'm going to run a marathon.
Yeah, and someone who says, I go to the gym on Mondays at 5 p.m. at this location, dramatic difference in how often they show up. And there have been many studies that have found this for all sorts of things, from exercise to whether someone will recycle to whether they get their flu shot. If they can tell you when and where exactly they're going to get it, they're more likely to show up. So all of that sort of thing. It sounds kind of obvious to say, make a plan for your habits, but the reality is people show up a lot of the time and wake up in the morning and they kind of feel like, I hope I find time to meditate today. I hope I feel motivated to write today. And having a clear and specific plan for when and where it's going to occur can help a lot. You can layer accountability into that. So there's an example I give later in the book of what's called a habit contract. So this guy, Brian was his name, he came up with this contract. He wrote down all the things that he wanted to do. This was mostly related to his fitness habit, but he was not following through. And so he wrote down that plan for what he was going to do and when it was going to happen. And then at the end, he put 3 lines down. One was for him to sign, one was for his wife, and one was for his trainer. And if he didn't follow through, he layered on some kind of punishment. I can't remember exactly what it was. It was something like whatever amount of money he spent on the trainer, his wife could spend that shopping or something like that. But he was just trying to find a way to increase the stakes, right? And so the point is accountability can help. There is a nuance, though, which is I think that it's better accountability works better if you care about the opinion of the person that is holding you accountable. If you are just if you just get paired up at work and they're like, here's your accountability buddy, it doesn't really matter that much. But if you're worried about letting that person down, if you're worried about how they're going to judge you, if you're worried about looking bad to them, then accountability can be quite strong. And so I think there's this key question of who are you being accountable to? But ultimately, again, what we're trying to get back to are some of these things we've hinted at before, which is, how could this feel fun to me? How could this feel like something I want to do? How does this add up and accumulate into the identity I'm trying to build? Can you draw some of those deeper connections to the type of person you want to be and why it's enjoyable, and maybe not rely as much on accountability tactics, I guess I could say. Doesn't mean they can't work. It's just that in the long run, it's very hard to stick to something that you aren't actually excited about. People will show up and do that for a little bit, but you're not going to keep looking at yourself in the mirror each day and say, oh, I'm going to do this thing that I hate. You need to find a way to make it enjoyable.
Good question. Got a microphone up here. Come on up here, Jodes. Right up to Becky up front here. There we go. Thanks, Jodes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Environment and habits. So we talked at the beginning about how it's very personal, your habits are. So how do you speak to not completely having control of your environment? Because based on what you said, I'm going to go home and empty my whole house out. And my family's probably not going to appreciate that. But I can imagine that shows up in the workplace too. You don't always have control of your environment. So how do you build and or break habits in environments you cannot control?
Yep, it's a great question, and it's something we all deal with in varying capacities. Also, this is not just a downside. Like, life is better with people. And so one of the trade-offs of having people in your life is you need to balance, their needs too, and their interests too. So it's not totally a negative thing, but it is a reality that you don't get full control of your house or full control of the office space. The first question that I would ask is, when is this habit supposed to, or when or where does this habit live best? If you have a seed and you plant it on a rocky cliff, it doesn't grow very well. But if you put it in fertile soil and it gets a lot of rain and sun, it sprouts up right away. And habits are like that too. Where are you trying to build the habits that you want to, foster and develop? One way to frame this is to say, everybody has 24 hours in a day, but those hours, if you break them into different blocks, they look very different in terms of which hours you control and which hours you don't control. Imagine somebody who's trying to get in the habit of meditating. And usually you could say something like, well, meditate when you have your cup of coffee in the morning. 7 a.m. is a good time to meditate. It's early in the day's under your control, whatever. But if you told me that, I would say, I'm trying to get pants on my 4-year-old and chasing them through the kitchen and getting them breakfast. It's not a good time to meditate. And so when does that habit...
Pants will be on backwards.
Yeah. When and where is the right space for that habit to live in your life? And a different way to ask that, or maybe a more precise way, is, which hours in my day are most under my control? And is that the time that I can, better shape those habits that I'm trying to build? Another way to ask it is to focus not on the time, but to focus on the environment. So most habits grow better in a different environment. And there are two things to think about here. The first is, habits are harder to build if you're doing it in an environment where other habits are kind of competing with them. So let's say that your couch at 7 p.m. is the environment where you turn Netflix on and watch TV. And what you want to do is start to get in the habit of journaling every day. Well, maybe you decide after dinner you're going to sit down on the couch and journal, but without even saying anything, you're kind of unconsciously being pulled toward grabbing the remote and turning Netflix on, because that's what usually happens there. There are a range of things you could do here. You could, let's say you buy a chair and put it in the corner of the room, and you're going to call that the journaling chair. And the only thing that happens there is you sit down and you do your journaling. Well, now you've got a slightly different space where that happens, and you don't have these previous habits that are tied to it. So that's one factor to consider, is, do I have kind of a clean space? Sometimes I'll say one space, one use. So do you have one obvious use for this space, and that's where the habit lives? But the second thing to consider is social environment. Let's say you want to start doing yoga, and your roommates or whoever you live with, they don't care about working out or doing yoga. Well, maybe you're running into a little bit of friction there by taking up space in the living room and kind of dominating the space to do your thing. But there are yoga studios, and you can go there for an hour, and that's a space where your desired behavior is normal, and now it's much easier for the habit to grow there. So I think it comes back to a range of questions around, what is the right time, what is the right space, can I figure out a way to control this as best as I can, and plant the seed of this habit on fertile ground where it's more likely to blossom and grow. So those are some different things you can do. Yeah.
While this question's coming, let me just say this, Becky, to that question too, is in an organizational and team setting, one of the things that I would say is, are we even acknowledging those things that you just said? And what I notice on many teams and organizations is, yes, we're forming different habits, and yet you may have this sense that things are out of my control, but we haven't had the actual, those of you that know that I say this, what is mentionable becomes more manageable. And so are we actually making it mentionable on our team? Hey, I've noticed one of the habits we have is we talk about a whole lot of things that in this full group setting that really ought to be one-on-ones. And let's break this wasting time of full group dialogue when it really ought to be one-on-one. Or, hey, you know what? There's some things we really ought to be talking about as a team that we seem to be avoiding that I think we need to have time and make space to make them mentionable. Hey, whatever those things are we actually acknowledging the habits that we already have in motion, and are they bringing out the best in us, or are they getting in the way?
Bringing up that conversation is a crucial thing. It just sparked another thought for me, which is I'm very lucky because I kind of set my schedule as an entrepreneur, but I think having a conversation like this could be worthwhile, which is I've realized that if I have my phone on me, I don't really get to run my day. And so what I've tried to do, I can't do it every day, maybe I do it 7 or 8 out of 10 days, is I'll leave my phone in another room until lunch. And really what that means is I'm away from my phone from 9 to 12. But I get 3 hours where I can work on my agenda, not everybody else's agenda. And so, what does that conversation look like in the workplace? Maybe you can't get 3 hours, maybe you only get 1 hour, but can that be discussed?
Places are having to get more creative that way. Again, not saying that that's the only solution,
Sure.
But to be able to identify, now that we have emails and texts and Slack and this and this and this and this, some teams are trying to communicate with each other in all these ways, and they're trying to use the technology that they've been given, and in many cases are saying it's not helping us be as effective as we need to. So
each team has to come up with their own solution, but I've worked with some teams. They have a standing block, and every Tuesday there's no meetings for anybody in the company. Right. It's just it's things like that. But anyway,
PG.
I forgot my question.
Sorry, buddy.
It's fine. I forgot my answer.
So what we've been talking about primarily during this conversation is changing behavior that you're motivated to change, and that you've decided that you want to make that change and change these habits. What about in scenarios where you're trying to help somebody to make those changes? That's not their motivation in the workplace, at home, with kids, whatever. But does there have to be buy-in on that end, or can you implement some of these laws subtly and kind of drag them towards those behavioral changes, or does it have to be something that is agreed upon that they're going to work towards that?
Yeah, this always comes up. People are like, I get it, my habits, but really it's other people.
I want to change.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. It's something we all care about. Like we all have people in our lives, that whether we work with them or people we love or whatever, that we're hoping to help. Okay, so first thing is, everybody is a product of the environment that they're in. And so environment design changes, whether you're changing how the kitchen's laid out or whether you're changing what the workplace looks like or whatever, everybody's got to respond to that. And humans are creatures of convenience. Like most of the habits that we perform are things that are, like look at a lot of the biggest companies in the world. All they really do is they try to optimize for convenience. Like all DoorDash is doing is trying to make it as convenient as possible for food to get to you. And they're worth $60 billion. Can you take that same lesson and try to apply it to the behaviors that you're trying to help people perform? How can I make this as convenient as possible for them? And can the environment be adjusted in that way? That will help a little bit. There's also some interesting lessons that you could take from like a kindergarten classroom. So if you go to kindergarten classrooms, they're often organized in a very clean way. So you'll find out like the kids who say are in the blue reading group, they'll sit in the blue chairs and they get their books out of the blue basket and they write on the paper with the blue stripe at the top. Like there's a lot of cohesion between the environment. And it makes it easier for them to follow through on the behavior because they don't have to think as much about what they're supposed to do and where they're supposed to go. Adults are like this too. I worked out at a CrossFit gym a couple years ago where nobody would put the weights back the way the owner liked. And so one day after everybody was done, he put the whole gym back together the way it was supposed to be. He took a picture of the wall and printed it out and put it on there and said, at the end of each class, this is what the wall should look like. And then all the adults are like, oh, okay, and then just like goes right back there, right? So do you have very clear instructions and directions, and do you have an environment that's optimized to make the behavior you want easy? I think that's like kind of step one. There's a second phrase which is kind of interesting, which is praise the good, ignore the bad. It's a little tricky because I don't think it's like a blanket statement for life where nobody should ever get critical feedback or you shouldn't learn from your mistakes. But as a general rule, people want to do the things that make them feel good. Everybody likes that. Everybody likes the emotion of feeling good and being praised and being supported. And so when you're trying to usher someone along, praise the good, ignore the bad. As an example, I went to the gym, this is like 2 or 3 years ago, and I was there on a Friday night with a friend. And we walked in, this guy was already working out, he was there before us. We went in, we did it was a pretty short workout, 20 or 30 minutes, and then we're getting ready to leave. We're putting our shoes on by the door. And he walked by, and he looked at the person who was with me, and he said, pretty short workout. And I thought, man, it's kind of the exact opposite of what you should be saying, which is great that you're in here on a Friday night, but we do this so often. We criticize the very behavior that we wish to see. Imagine the quiet kid in the family comes down to dinner and then shares something about their day, and then somebody's like, oh, look who finally spoke up. You're like, man, good luck getting them to do that next time. And instead what you see is people often criticize the good rather than praising it. And what you want is for people to feel loved and supported and happy in the moment for the behaviors that you're trying to usher along. And so can you give people that feeling, and then that increases the odds that they're going to show up again the next time. So those are a couple examples. There are many other things that you could do, but those are a couple things to kind of get things started.
Well, as many of us in this room know, when we talk about emotional intelligence, and we talk about part of it is our own recognition of this. So can I recognize and understand that in myself of what my behavior might be? And then can I, to Paul, your point is what is it that I want to shift? But also it's the recognition and understanding of that in somebody else. And then how do we use that awareness to shift the behavior? So one question I'd ask is, again, sometimes on our teams, all of us in roles of leadership, we are in a position to try to coach and develop other people. And we're trying to help them think about not just the job they're being asked to do, but the process with how they go about doing it. And we're trying to help optimize them and coach and develop and support them to get to that outcome. And sometimes they might not be aware of what the habits they might already have. And sometimes then the dialogue, again, back to the question is, well, what is the outcome that we're wanting? And reverse engineering it to say, well, if this is the outcome we want, then what are the things that are helping us get there, and what are the things that are getting in the way? And bring them into the process of, okay, well, let's identify that so that it's not just you pointing it out, but it's them thinking about what the outcome is.
There's also just role modeling the behavior. This is not exactly your question, but the behavior that you display is always going to be more powerful than the behavior you request. Right, so what you show people and how you show up as a leader is always going to influence that more. There's the best.
Would you say it's a temperature that you set, maybe, James?
I think so.
Good. That's good.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kajal, and I love this approach. I'm going to start by saying I love this 4-part approach, and I'm going to go home similar to somebody who said that they're going to empty out their house. I am very motivated to do that. My question is both personal and organizational, and it might touch on what you just said, but I'll ask it anyway, which is, how do you get over the guilt or the failure of the failed attempts at starting a habit or showing up? And the translation of that in the organization that I want to ask about is, how do you help people get over, if you're going to try something new, if you're going to create change, how do you get over the collective eye roll of, oh, we've tried that before, or, been there, done that?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question, and I think we all have felt it in our personal lives, and we also know and have been on teams that have that kind of reaction as well. There's not one way to do it. There are many ways, and I don't know that there's one magical thing, but maybe collectively or cumulatively they all come together. So the first thing is, I'm saying this more on a personal level, but it also applies to that comment that shows up in the workplace, which is, it doesn't have to be this way. We don't have to assign this level of value to everything. we don't have to say, I can think of, the first thing that came to my mind when you were talking was this guy who's a reader of mine who said, look, whenever I do this, I start doing this habit and then I fall off after like 8 days. And then the first thing I tell myself is like, why did I bother? I knew I was going to fail on this again. And my response was, why has it got to be like this? Like, why do we have to do this to ourselves? We don't need to assign your whole self-worth to this thing. It was just something that you experimented with and tried, and that's fine. We can move on and try another line of attack and then keep going. It doesn't have to be like this whole assessment of your self-worth. And the same way with in an organization, like, why are we turning this into some doomsday scenario? Like, in what circumstance would you expect your very first attempt to be the perfect solution to the problem? Like, it's so unlikely that of the universe of options that you could choose, or of the universe of ways that we could go about this as a company, that the first one we would try would be the best one. So you need some willingness to experiment. I think that's my first answer, is that it is not possible to get results in life without a willingness to experiment. The second thing is, you have to realize that a lot of the work that you were putting in is not wasted, it's just being stored. So sometimes the example I'll give is, you walk in and imagine you're in a cold room, you can see your breath, all right? It's like 25 degrees. You got this ice cube on the table. You start heating the room up, 26, 27, 28, ice cube's still there, 29, 30, 31. Then all of a sudden you get to 32 degrees, and it's this 1 degree shift, seemingly no different than the 1 degree shifts that just came before, but suddenly you hit this phase transition, the ice cube melts. A lot of changes in life are like that. And it's very easy to get frustrated in the middle of the process. Like, people are like, we've been meeting as a team every Friday for the last 6 months. We still haven't shipped this feature. It's easy to get frustrated in that moment. Or, I've been running every day for the last 2 months. I still can't see a change in my body. Like, why am I doing this? But complaining about that is kind of like complaining about heating an ice cube from 25 to 30 degrees and it not melting yet. The work is not wasted. It's just being stored. There's this quote from the San Antonio Spurs, who won 5 NBA championships. They got this quote hanging in their locker room. And it says, whenever I think about giving up, I think about the stonecutter who takes a rock and bangs on the rock 100 times without it splitting in two. And then, at the 101st blow, it cracks. And I know that it wasn't the 101st that did it, but all the 100 that came before. And so many of your habits are like that. It's not the last sentence that finishes the novel, it's all the 100 that came before. It's not the last conversation that closes the sale, it's all the 100 that came before. And it's this willingness to continue to show up and keep hammering on the rock that leads to the outcomes that we want. But people get impatient, and it doesn't feel good to show up and do something and not have any reaction for it. And so it's easy to give up when you're in the middle of the process. Okay, last thing that I'll say is, there's this trite common phrase in life, which is try, try, try again. I think we need to adjust it to be try, try, try differently. It's not that effort is not useful. Effort's very useful, but you need to keep trying different lines of attack to get the outcome that you want. If you keep showing up and doing the same thing and you're not getting results, like, this is not the right approach. But that doesn't mean give up on it. It just means try a new way. My personal example is, I've always been pretty good. I was an athlete in college. I've always been pretty good about working out. I enjoy that part of it, but I sort of ignored nutrition and diet and everything. And I could get away with it when I was younger, but then you get in your 30s and you're like, it's catching up to me now. So I downloaded MyFitnessPal to track my meals, and I didn't even do it for a day. I did it for one meal. And I was like, this is a pain in the ass. There's no way that I'm going to do this. And so I deleted that, tried some other stuff for a little while. I'm kind of fumbling around for like a year and a half. And then eventually I decided, okay, I'm going to hire a coach, and he's going to send me 1 email a week. So he sends me 1 email every Monday to check in. And I had a spreadsheet. Most people are probably like this, like 80% of the meals that you eat are like the same 20 places with the same 20 things. And so once I got those 20 in the spreadsheet, I could just copy and paste them to track, and that was like a lot easier. So for whatever reason, that was the thing that worked, okay? And I'm only bringing that up not to recommend any kind of diet advice or whatever, but it's not like I didn't know the tactics. I knew the strategies, right? And still, it took me 2.5 years to figure out something that worked for me. So the thought that you would figure it out right away is just not, it's not always like that. And that's fine. You just need a willingness to experiment and keep trying differently. Over here.
Noah, we're going to come to Howard in just a second, too. So if we want to find him, well, I'm going to ask him a question.
No, this is good. We'll make the pregnant lady run all over the room.
Yeah.
I feel guilty.
It's part of the habit that we're forming here, James. Jody?
I have two questions. How would you define perhaps the difference between routine and habit as the first question? And then the second question, how do you define success in the context of personal growth? And how can someone avoid the trap of constantly trying to optimize their life without truly being fulfilled?
Yeah, great questions. All right, so first question, routine and habit. Somewhat this is just semantics, okay? So technically, if you were to talk to a researcher, they would tell you a habit is a behavior that's like more or less automatic. Tying your shoes, brushing your teeth, every time you pick up a pair of barbecue tongs, you got to tap them together twice, like stuff that you don't even really think about. Right? Obviously, I'm not the only one. All right, so it really quick stuff, right? And a routine is not that. It would be something, a daily practice, a ritual, something you do consistently, but it doesn't have to be like fast, like tying your shoes, brushing your teeth. So the difference technically is that a habit can be automatic and mindless. But as we all know, and as this entire conversation has gone on, we don't use the word habit like that in daily conversation. We basically use them interchangeably. When I ask you, what kind of habits are you working on? You're going to say, I'm trying to write every day, or I'm trying to go to the gym 4 days a week, or you're going to talk about routines. And so I think that if you're talking to a researcher, that's the difference. Habits are automatic and mindless and very short. If you're talking to any normal person about what's going on and what are they trying to do, they're basically interchangeable. The second question is the more important one, which is how do you define success? And how do you not get in this mode of endlessly optimizing and kind of viewing results and optimization as the ultimate end-all, be-all to everything? I have two answers for you. The first is basically a series of questions that I ask myself, and these might be helpful for you all to ask and reflect on too. There is no single answer, there's just continual answers, and so they are the kind of questions that are good to repeat and revisit and come back to each quarter or month or year or whatever. First question is, what am I optimizing for? And the answer to that question changes over time. Sometimes people optimize for more money, sometimes they optimize for free time, sometimes they optimize for time with family. But whatever the answer is, it's probably very personal, and it may shift. Like, who you are today is different than who you were 5 or 10 years ago. So what am I optimizing for? One of the lessons behind that question is people often think they're lacking motivation, but what they're really lacking is clarity. They don't know exactly what they want and what they're optimizing for. So what am I optimizing for? Second question, sort of a different variant on this one, is what season am I in right now? One of the challenges for ambitious people is that you pick a lot of stuff that you want to be good at, and you get into this situation where you're trying to optimize 7 things rather than being great at 2 things. And nobody is that good. You can't fracture your attention and expect to perform really well. So you can ask this question of, what season am I in right now? And maybe 2 of those things are a good fit for this season, but the other 5 got to wait. And that doesn't mean you can never do them. It just means they're not a right fit for right now. So what season am I in? The third question is, if I was going to draw a box around my ideal day, basically the question is, how do I want to spend my days? Or what does my day look like? So you draw a box around your ideal day, and then inside that box, you say, how can I make the most money possible, reach the most people possible, make the biggest impact possible, but not outside of it. And what happens usually is people will have opportunities come to them, and they'll start by saying, is this opportunity cool or not? Do I want to take that promotion? Do I want to do this project? And they say yes, and then they talk themselves into why the box should be drawn around that. But if you start by saying, this is how I want to live my days, and then you assess the opportunity, then you can see clearly, does this give me more of the life that I want or not? And people will make that trade all day long. They make this trade where they already live a good daily life, but they choose to take on a new opportunity that gives them more money but a worse daily life. And I think that's a bad trade. And so it comes from the order that you do it in. Do you start by asking, what kind of days do I want to live? So I think those 3 questions are kind of a good way of triangulating your North Star. What am I optimizing for? What season am I in right now? And what do I want my days to look like? And if you can run your opportunities and challenges and through the lens of that, maybe it puts you in a position to make better decisions.
And back to that clarity of what is the life that I'm trying to create, or on a team setting, what is that we're trying to create? If there isn't that clarity, everything else starts to feel foggy.
Let me just build on this just one more thing that came to mind. So I think this is true for individuals, but I also think it's true for organizations. What we're starting to get at here, what you're starting to see is there are a range of strategies that we've talked about for building better habits, making them obvious, attractive, easy, satisfying, a range of things you can do there. There's also a range of questions you can ask, like the ones that we just asked, about what is our strategy, where are we trying to focus? And no single question, no single strategy is going to transform your results as a company or transform your results as an individual. So what you're really wanting, what the like holy grail of behavior change is, it's not a single 1% improvement, it's like 1,000 of them. And the way to make them work together is to try to build a system. And this is one of the big ideas from Atomic Habits, which is we don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. So often in life we're told, especially in business, everybody's encouraging you, set a bigger goal for yourself, 10x your vision, think bigger. But the truth is, setting the goal is kind of the easy part. Like, I'm an author, right? So I could set a goal to sell 100 million books. Took me 3 seconds. Like, the goal is not the hard part. It's building a system of behaviors, a collection of habits that carries you toward that outcome.
Yeah.
And so if you look at most areas of life, most domains, the winners and the losers, the people who are succeeding and the people who are struggling, they often have similar goals. I mean, take the Olympics. Presumably every athlete at the Olympic Games has the goal of winning the gold medal. The goal is not the thing that determines the outcome. It's how much sleep they got the night before, coaching and strategy for the event, genetic ability and talent, like all kinds of things.
Yep.
Or if you have a job opening and 100 people apply for the job, presumably every candidate has the goal of getting the job. The goal is not the thing that determines the outcome. So if the winners and the losers have the same goals, the goal cannot be the thing that makes the difference in their performance. It has to be something else. And I think that something else is the system. And if I was going to put like a little finer point on the language, what do I mean by goal and system? Your goal is your desired outcome, the target, the thing you're shooting for. What is your system? It's the collection of daily habits that you follow. And so if there is ever a gap between your goal and your system, if there's ever a gap between your desired outcome and your daily habits will always win. Almost by definition, your current habits are perfectly designed to deliver your current results. So whatever system you've been running, whatever collection of habits you've been following for the last, say, 6 months or year or 2 years, it's carried you almost inevitably to the outcomes that you have right now. Now, having said all that, I'm not saying goals are useless, right? Goals are good for setting a sense of direction. They're good for filtering and determining should we do this or not. But where I've kind of come down on it after thinking about this for a few years and the book being out is goals are best for people who care about winning once. Systems are best for people who care about winning repeatedly. If you really want to drive results again and again, you need some kind of system, some process to keep them coming, to keep things up there. And so it's really this collection of habits that we're building and what identity that's ultimately leading us toward that drives the outcomes and not the goals that we set.
And congruence, that the goal I'm going for, that the backing up of action and behavior, building the system to move towards it.
Right. What we ultimately want, I kind of just described this like a dichotomy. We have goals and we have systems, but what we really want is alignment. Right?
Yep.
You want an alignment between your desired outcome, your goal, and your daily habits, your system. And I would say even further, between that and your identity that you're trying to build. How is the system I'm running each day, the collection of habits that I'm following, how is that feeding this larger outcome that we're trying to achieve and this identity that we're trying to build? How are we embodying the team and the person that we're trying to be?
Awesome. I want to just ask one more. Wait, do we have one more question? We did. Where were we at?
Yeah, right.
Oh, Sarah.
All right. Thank you both so much. This has been very insightful. I'm curious, what was your Denison major as an alum? But also, how did you?
That's right. Another Denison. There you go.
How did you get started thinking about habits and systems? And what are you thinking about next?
Yeah. My major was biomechanics, which sounds fancy, but was truly just made up.
Sounds fake.
I didn't know this at the time. It was a very entrepreneurial thing to do. I looked at the majors and I was like, I don't like any of these. They give you like 60 options. And I found out that you could design your own. And so I was like, okay, I'll just pick the classes that I like. And so I picked them. And then I said, what would this be? And biomechanics was the phrase I came up with. And they bought it. It was incredible. I got out of having to take like a bunch of high-level chemistry and physics. It was great. Anyway, yeah. So, yeah, my GPA is kind of like it's fake. Anyway, to answer your question, I got into habits because I cared about them. So it is a lot of work to have a good opinion about something. You need to research and read a lot and whatever. But at some level, anybody can have an opinion. And so I try to have a more strict filter, which is I only write about things that I practice. And if I practice it, then I have to realize how hard it is. And I fail and I try stuff and it doesn't work. And so I think the writing's better because of that. So I sent an email to my editor when I was working on Atomic Habits, and I was kind of lamenting how writing this book was wrecking all of my personal habits. And she said, well, we write the books we need. And that resonated. Like that's kind of how I view all of it. And pretty much everything that I've said today and everything that I write at some level is a reminder to myself. So that's how I choose topics. And I think one question you could have at the end of Atomic Habits is, that's great, I know how to build better habits, but which habit should I be focused on? Where should I direct my precious energy and attention? And that's kind of the big question I'm playing with now. So we could call that different things. We could call it strategy, call it decision making, call it focus and how you direct your attention. But it's kind of those topics and dancing around this idea of what would it look like to spend your time in the highest and best way? And to your question just a minute ago, what does best even mean? You know, like it's not just about results. It's also about lifestyle. It's also about family. It's also, it's a lot of things. So there's a lot to unpack there, but I'm kind of playing with different topics around that.
Thank you, James, for being here.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.